right, so welcome everyone. My name is Jay. Use they, them pronouns. I'm a priest in training here at Minnesota Zen Meditation Center. Is anyone here for the first time? Oh. Well, welcome back everyone. And hi to everyone on Zoom. I'm told that when people start giving talks, they try to like fit everything into the talk. So I tried not to do that, and I probably did anyway, so please forgive me. So tonight I wanted to talk about this concept in Zen, more so in Korean Zen, called don't know mind. And sometimes in Japanese Zen it's called beginner's mind, so kind of same thing. And I want to start by talking about just this basic question of, which basically comes down to why we're here, you know, like why is sitting and mindfulness practice relevant, and what does it how does it help us in our daily lives? And the basic idea is that when, you know, we talk about like what we take refuge in our lives, where do we go, you know, when we want to feel really safe and secure and held and home, basically. And, you know, the usual way that we look for a sense of certainty in our lives is in our thoughts. And so if we're looking for a true refuge, it's worth asking the question, you know, like is our thoughts, is the world of our mind, you know, is that really trustworthy? Is it really reliable? And another way that, you know, we human beings try to find refuge in a sense of certainty is by trying to feel good and trying to avoid feeling bad, right? So there's this sort of like constant management that's going on in the world of our thoughts. We're always relating to what's happening, and often, you know, like even single-celled organisms will do this. We move towards what we like and we move away from what we don't. So that's just our conditioning. And also this sort of conditioning creates a sense of restlessness, a sort of friction. So we're almost like kind of like jockeying for position, you could say. And this kind of puts us in a little bit of opposition to reality, or it creates a kind of gap, you could say, between the way things are and the way we want them to be, right? And with mindfulness practice and Buddhism, we see that that's happening all the time. And so there's, you know, all these different levels of ways that can take place. And when we sit, we realize it gets very, 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 very subtle. But actually the experience of enlightenment would be, you know, the absence of that grasping or that pushing and pulling. That's just so pervasive to our experience that it's almost like we don't even realize it most of the time. So this kind of restlessness, this world that this creates, is called samsara in Buddhism. It's kind of alternation between pleasure and pain, trying to kind of get things just right or fix them in place, you know, trying to really like get a hold on things, you know. Sometimes samsara is defined as the urge to correct. And, you know, I see this all the time in my own life, that things are never quite exactly how I want them. And I have, you know, I get an idea, I have a dog, and I wanted her to be able to run around. So I bought a house, and then I had a yard. And then I thought, well, I'd like to lay down in the yard. You know? And then I started laying down, and I was like, well, there's all these bugs in the grass, you know? So then I like brought a yoga mat. I was like, well, I'm just like laying on the ground. My neighbors are looking at me, you know? And so then I got a chair, but then the sun was in my eyes, you know? So then I moved the chair to under the tree in the shade, and then the birds started pooping on me. So, you know, it's just this constant alternation. And we have moments, obviously, of course, of pleasure, of, you know, feeling good. It's not to say that it's not real. It's just limited, really trying to find happiness this way. So Katagiri Roshi, the founder of our temple, in one of his books, he talks about like there's a string at the bottom of our experience, which I like talking about, that kind of the gap. Like almost like there's a caveat to it, you know? It's really hard for us to just experience what we're experiencing, no strings attached. And, you know, when we see this, when we really stop and think about it or experience it in sitting, it can be very overwhelming to realize, you know, the only recourse we have from suffering or when we feel bad is to try to feel good. You know, that's just really thinking about it. It can be a little limiting. So, you know, then maybe we start looking for an alternative, and maybe, you know, we come somewhere like here. There's got to be something else, right? Than just trying to go back to the same thing. You know, we all have our things. You know, I like sweet things. You know, some people like to go on really nice vacations. You know, some people like to have a really nice meal, and there's nothing wrong with those, right? But it's like this, the limitation of sense pleasure. You know, so, you know, are we just stuck? Is this all we have? And mindfulness is sort of comes in as a sort of escape hatch to this, as an alternative. And so the way that it works is we come, we sit down, you know, we see the way the attention goes to our thoughts, you know. And so it's a process of learning to unhook from those thoughts that are so compelling, right? It's like we are the thoughts. And we identify with all the goings on, you know, kind of these dramas in our lives, trying to solve problems, trying to kind of move the pieces around on the chessboard. That's just what the mind does. It just secretes thoughts. So, you know, we learn that we can't control this secretion of thoughts. And through mindfulness, we see that it's not necessarily moving us in the direction of greater peace and happiness and well-being. Just thinking more, thinking more, thinking more. You know, it's like at a certain point, it becomes clear that that's not the way. So, you know, little by little, we practice, and it's, you know, over and over again with gentleness, with sort of like an it's all good kind of mentality. We're switching the refuge from our thoughts to something in the present moment. Sometimes the breath, sometimes the body, or sounds in the room, or sometimes just opening up anything that we're aware of that's happening right now. We get a little space from our thoughts this way. And mindfulness is a training in how to do this. And so we're switching the identification from, say, the thinking and, you know, the content of what's happening to the awareness of what's happening. Sometimes it's said that the knowing is free from what is known. So switching that identification, and mindfulness is the training in how to do this. Sometimes it's talked about switching from the foreground to our experience, which is, you know, the juicy stuff, right? What happened today? What are we going to do tomorrow? What did that person say to us? You know, all the content, to the background, which is maybe, you know, the sound of the car or the feeling of your feet in your socks. Things that are so neutral that they don't catch the mind because they're not interesting to the mind. You know, they don't feel good and they don't feel bad. So we kind of just tend to ignore it. So training the mind to take more refuge in these sort of neutral things. You know, and they're not always very interesting. So, you know, keeping our attention on them, it is a practice. You know, some people say it's like training a puppy to go to the bathroom on the newspaper, you know, and then the puppy just pees all over the floor and you just bring it back. You just bring it back, you know, you don't get mad at the puppy, right? And so it's subtle, and it takes practice to be able to trust these neutral experiences, because it's not dramatic like what we're used to. And it goes against the conditioning of the mind, you know, that says that we're the center of things, and that it's up to us to do our lives, right? But, you know, when we really tune into it and we really come to practice and start like a daily practice, this sort of refuge can be very healing and very powerful. And it goes against the stream, as is sort of a phrase in Buddhism, that everything around us is about kind of feeling good and feeling in control and managing, like that's what our society does, that's what our human conditioning does. So it's not easy to switch this. And we also see that there's a subtlety to things, that things aren't fixed, that the brain is what maybe fixes things with concepts, but when we really sit down and pay attention to what's happening in this moment, it's kind of ungraspable. We grasp it with words, we put words on it, and that feels manageable, controllable. The more the mind relaxes, the more we realize that everything is in constant flux. And this sort of constant flux place, this land, you could say, it's very different from the space of our thoughts. It can be very uncomfortable. It's not so easy to stay in this place because the sense of self isn't really there. And that is very disruptive to our basic fundamental feeling of who we are. And it also becomes clear how much being in control is a form of illusion. And when we stay with, this is reality, this is the way that things are, despite the mind's best intentions for it to be otherwise. And when we stay with reality, we're able to perceive three things that are in Buddhism are called the three pillars of existence, which in Pali are anicca, dukkha, and anatta. So the first one, anicca, is impermanence, which is probably is associated with Buddhism, and this is probably the easiest to perceive intellectually. Things are changing all the time. If you walked up to someone on the street, and said, "Is there change?" Yes, of course, things change, right? Because of this change, that things are changing all the time, there's no lasting satisfaction. There's no there. There's no fixing things into place and holding them there, and this creates a restlessness, a stress, which in Buddhism is called dukkha, or sometimes translated as suffering. All the levels, big suffering, little suffering. And the third one is anatta, which is the idea that because things are changing all the time, right? There's nothing fixed, and that means that we're not fixed, right? Our sense of self is not fixed. It's empty of inherent existence, you could say. And so with mindfulness practice, we see these three aspects of reality, and it can be very uncomfortable, and it's actually also good news if we can let these things in, if we can really align ourselves with these truths. Because the more we can align with this sort of fluidity, with this organic, natural way of things, we realize we don't have to hold on so tight, all that grasping to sort of move the chess pieces around. We realize we can let go of some of that, and it's not that we don't, respond to our lives. I think quite the contrary, actually. It allows us to respond, more skillfully when we're able to align with the way things are and then respond from that place. Sort of get out of our own way, you could say. So how can we, tolerate these three aspects of existence that are hard to bear? And this is where, the concept of don't know mind comes in, right? This mind that's open and curious, sometimes associated with the phrase like, what is this, right? Just like this open-ended, just, I don't know, but I want to know kind of thing, and I'm not like trying to figure it out, I'm just exploring basically and letting, myself be changed by that. So a quote here, a major theme in Korean Zen is the adequacy or enoughness of the mind before conceptualization, before we try to lock things down, opinion and ideation. In its universal aspect, not knowing and not understanding contain a vast array of possibilities. As trust and confidence in this don't know mind is attained, intimacy and compassion become actualized, and don't know beings to bestow the gifts of clarity, respect, kindness, and responsiveness. Therefore, the last word of Zen involves connecting with all of life and the environment through enlightened compassion activity. Because when we're aligned with these truths, there's no separation, right? Like we see change and we see that we are change. And so, of course, we're a part of that. There's a natural response of the heart that wants to participate, that wants to be involved, that cares. And so when we're in alignment, with mindfulness, with reality, it allows this creative expression to come forth naturally. And it's not something we do, it's a process that kind of unfolds. And you could also say this is wisdom at work. This is letting wisdom do its job. And Pema Chodron has a good way of talking about this sort of don't know mind experience. She talks about how being human is like fundamentally ambiguous. The fundamental ambiguity of being human, she has an article, How to Live with Uncertainty and Change. She says, it is not impermanence per se, or even knowing that we're going to die, that is the cause of our suffering, the Buddha taught. Rather, it is our resistance to the fundamental uncertainty of our situation. Our discomfort arises from all of our effort to put ground under our feet, to realize our dream of constant okayness. When we resist change, it's called suffering, but when we completely let go and not struggle against it, when we can embrace the groundlessness of our situation and relax into its dynamic quality, that is called enlightenment, or awakening to our true nature, to our fundamental goodness. Another word for this is freedom. Freedom from struggling against the fundamental ambiguity of being human. So she talks about a kind of groundlessness, which I really like. It's helpful for me throughout the day. That don't know mind kind of, it comes up naturally, when the mind is relaxed enough. And there's a sort of choice sometimes, I feel like I can either let it in, this sort of groundlessness, where I'm everything's a little fuzzy and my sense of self is, it's kind of there, but it's also not a thing, and I can let that in, or I can push it away and I can try to go back to my familiar habits of trying to feel good and not feel bad, right? There's a sort of grabbing at pleasure and trying to avoid pain. And through sitting with the fundamental ambiguity of what it means to be human, we learn to stop grabbing, and pushing. And we realize that the futility of this project, we realize that this alternating between feeling good and feeling bad is just the way things are. And so mindfulness can help us stop fighting it, and it can allow a deep sort of peace and sense of ease or even equanimity to arise when we're really okay. This is the way that it is, and we feel really happy for a while, maybe even a few minutes if we're really paying attention. Joy arises, and then I don't know, the mailman knocks on the door and the dog goes berserk or something like that, and then we feel irritated, right? And then so we can be trying to manage this back and forth, or there's a kind of okayness with that's the way that it is, right? And so there's freedom in that. It doesn't mean that we stop feeling, or stop having our lives be the way that they are. We still feel frustrated, hurt, upset, sad, all these things. We grieve, we desire, we still keep being human, of course. But it helps us hold these things a little bit more lightly and not take them so personally. And there's a sense of, this is nature, right? This is not personal to us as a separate self. And it helps us feel connected to all human beings because this is a shared experience. We all, on a fundamental level, this is how we live our lives. And the peace that we're looking for when we try to manipulate things, and get things just right, is actually, the irony is that it's found right in the middle of the ambiguity, and the uncontrollability, when in the capacity to sit with that, that is where freedom is found. So we learn to ease into this free fall. And Joseph Goldstein has a metaphor that I like about, I'll just read it. Imagine yourself jumping out of an airplane and free falling for the first few minutes. Imagine the sense of exhilaration, right? You're like, whoa! And then you realize you don't have a parachute and you panic, and you're falling through the space and you keep falling and you're terrified that you don't have one. And then, after a while you realize you don't have a parachute and there's also no ground. That's kind of the feeling of the groundlessness. He says, at that moment of the journey, you just enjoy the ride. And so the more we practice this don't know mind, opening to the fundamental ambiguity of our human life, trying to find certainty in a world, that's just uncertain fundamentally, we see the stress of, trying to make things fixed that aren't fixed. And the more we practice, the more we sit, the more we allow the mind to sort of relax into these things, wisdom kind of comes in. And we see these old habits, which of course they never go away, right? We get a little bit more space from them, more and more, hopefully. But we see our doing more and more clearly. And over time, over the long haul, wisdom starts to come in and sees it. It's like, I've tried that before. Like that way lies suffering, right? And it lets it go, whatever it is that we're doing. And even if we don't make a different choice, sometimes that's part of the process, right? We see what we're doing, we know that it's the same pattern, and we can't stop ourselves, but it's still accumulating information, which is leading to wisdom. And there's a kind of clear seeing, which in Pali is called sampanjana, clear seeing things for what they really are. And when you really have that moment of clarity, of insight, sometimes after a sitting, you get up and you just maybe see things like just more clearly than you ever have. And wisdom will just come in and make the responsive, skillful decision. And if it needs to let things go, it will let things go. But of course, this isn't something that we can do, right? Because that's back in the pushing and pulling. So, and a lot of what we notice when we practice mindfulness, of course, is all the times we can't unhook from our habits, and that's okay too. And a lot of times we notice, the way that we take things personally, the way we want things to permanently satisfy, right? Despite our knowledge, we keep trying to sort of pin things down. We see the way we aren't aligned with reality, and it can be painful. But I think, this can be seen as good news too. You can say, I'd rather see it than not see it, right? Because that little bit of awareness, I think, can go a really long way. This is a huge part of waking up, and it's not linear, we see things, we're caught, right? And then we're able to let go and make a different choice, we really let go into the experience of the moment, and whatever was tightening its grip on us, it lets go. And liberation, right? And then 5 minutes we're back, so it's moment by moment by moment. There's a quote from a Korean Zen master, only keep this don't know mind, this is true Zen practice. So how do we keep this don't know mind in mind? And it's difficult too, because it can sort of evoke a fear, like if I really stay in this like fuzzy, open-ended, everything's uncertain phase, like kind of place, like what about all my responsibilities? What about, my job? And what about my life I need to plan and conceptualize and take care of my relationships. And those concepts are useful, right? We have a name, we live in Minneapolis, it's a concept. And it's not that we, drop those. I think there's a sense of them as a useful fiction. Right? We use them to talk to each other, to communicate, and we have an understanding to that. That's all it is. It's just a concept. So this don't know mind is sometimes what Buddhism calls skillful means, because it helps us cultivate wise perceptions about the way that reality actually is. And it allows us to be more intimate with the way things actually are, and, which is impermanent and unreliable and doesn't have a fixed permanent self. And the more we sort of use our don't know mind, it exposes the lack of substantiality about things. And we see that things are more of a process rather than something fixed. So what is our age, for example? It's like, do we feel any different? Have we actually changed from, the day we turn the next age? Or is it more of a concept, right? It's just like this constant unfolding process, and it's fuzzy. So Eihei Dogen, who's a 13th century Japanese Buddhist monk, and he's the founder of our Soto school, he writes, "It is an established way in Buddha Dharma, which is Buddhist practice, to deny that birth turns into death. Accordingly, birth is understood as no birth. It is an unshakable teaching in Buddha's discourse that death does not turn into birth. Accordingly, death is understood as no death. Birth is an expression, complete this moment. Death is an expression, complete this moment." So they're completely themselves, and they're separate on one hand, and also they're completely intertwined, right? We're living and dying all at the same time. He says, "They are like winter and spring. You do not call winter the beginning of spring, nor summer the end of spring." So we have these concepts, winter starts on December 22nd. But, that's not actually how it happens, right? What's the difference between the end of fall and the beginning of winter? Those things they're in flux. They're interconnected, right? They're not separate. So how can we live our lives with this don't know mind? We can be curious. We can be curious about anything. I think that's the beauty of it. Don't know mind, or you could say awareness or mindfulness, it doesn't care what it's aware of. It doesn't need a particular object of experience to kind of arrive at this liberating place. It's more about the way we're relating to things. So it comes down to kind of being open to however things are, even if it's uncomfortable or unpleasant, or we're doing the same old thing, or there's a rigidity or a defensiveness or a fearfulness, or we're being controlling. We're just noticing again and again and again. This is the way we're relating to all these things. So just opening again and again. And if we don't like that, if we don't like the way it is, we can notice that too. There's nothing that's outside of awareness. So Suzuki Roshi, sometimes he has a book called Not Always So. It's like, really, like, is that really, is that really true? What's that like? What's going on now? It's uncertain. Right? And this ability to hold this uncertainty allows for a greater acceptance of the way things are. It allows us to have more space for everything. We learn not to kind of throw things out of our heart or deny things or say, that's not okay. We learn to let more and more in. And this is kind of a cultivation of equanimity that strengthens in our hearts and minds over time. And we can also cultivate this sort of open curiosity, don't know mind by dropping in questions into our practice. Things like, can this be okay? Right? Or, this too, right? This is here, right? Like, it's gonna change, definitely. But right now it's like this, and it can't be any other way. And the way that it is could be discomfort in the body, grasping, aversion, thoughts, emotions, whatever. But like, can that be part of the experience too? Can we not push that out of our hearts? It's like this now is another one that I like a lot. Sometimes it's like this, it's like, yeah. So meditation helps us to learn to be intimate with all of it. Don't know mind is a kind of intimacy, because we're not separating ourselves from things as they are. And it sort of sanctifies our experience in the light of awareness. So it's very, very simple, right? This practice is so simple, and it's not easy, especially over time. You know, we open one moment, and then we drop it and we do it again. And unfortunately, having an intellectual understanding of all of this is not very helpful. You know, so don't take my word for it. You really have to see it working in your own life and in your own mind. So saying in early Buddhism, ehi passiko in Pali, which translates as basically just come check it out for yourself, you know. And see, you know, is this don't know mind, is this awareness, is this mindfulness practice, is this our meditation? Can we trust it? You know, is it a true refuge? And you know, rather than wanting and getting and pushing and pulling and coordinating and configuring, we can take refuge in the awareness of whatever it is that's occurring. And ultimately, this is what the heart's really looking for, right? Is a sense of rightness, a sense of completeness, a sense of returning to our true nature, you know, a sense of belonging, a sense of that. And we can watch the process, right? The point is not to change it, the point is to see it. And when we see it, wisdom comes in, and it can distinguish between what's wholesome and unwholesome naturally. That's wisdom's job. It's not something we can do. We can be more available to it. And when we're really in line with this don't know mind, or you know, maybe we feel like awareness is strong, or we've been sitting for a while, or we go on a retreat or something like that, and there is this sort of deep and quiet joy that comes up. You know, we don't have, you know, it's hard for the grasping and aversion and the mind's conditioned tendencies. They very rarely totally go away, but sometimes they can be pretty quiet. And when we're in those places, you know, at peace or feeling like we're part of what's happening, you know, there's a sense of just like things keep unfolding, like empty phenomena are just rolling on. You know, and we are this unfolding, we are this sort of tumbling on. There's no separation. And there's a rightness and a sense of wholeness to this, to living this way. And again, I just want to reiterate, this doesn't mean that we roll over like a dead log and just like let life happen to us, right? It's, our lives are animated by a different force, by a different creative force when we're living like this way. And sometimes, oftentimes, it takes the shape of taking action when we've been avoiding action for a long time, for instance. But the activity, the creative force, is not coming from a mental place. It's coming from a different place. So I guess I would just encourage you all to try to notice these pillars, 3 pillars of existence, next time you sit down and meditate. The impermanence, the change, the sense of unreliability of things, and the sense of the lack of a permanent or a fixed self. And you might find that when you sit down to meditate, there's a sense of ambiguity of things, you know, there's a little, things are always moving, right? We can't pin it down. It's ungraspable reality. And there's a sense that comes along with that of like, you know, what even is happening? I don't know, right? Like, I really don't know. And that's uncomfortable to really be with that. But yeah, it's nourishing when we can learn to be with that. And we don't need to try too hard at this, you know. We're just sort of receiving the experience, whatever it is, whatever's the mind's interested in, and just opening to the whole body sitting, even if it's uncomfortable, you know. Just allowing and letting things unfold and letting the body be. So we're practicing a kind of intimacy with non-attachment or non-control. We don't need to like define things necessarily in certain ways. And we might notice too when we sit down that the mind really wants some form of solid ground, you know, in the form of a fixed idea about something. It wants to create some kind of solidity, wants to grab hold of things in some way, either in the mind or in the body. And then we see that there's a tightness that creates. And if we notice that, we can also notice a flow to our experience. We can trust this flow that's constant, this movement. So by sitting, we're learning to trust that. So I will leave you with some words from Wendell Berry, who says, always in the big woods, when you leave familiar ground and step off alone into a new place, there will be, along with the feelings of curiosity and excitement, a little nagging of dread. It is the ancient fear of the unknown. And it is your first bond with the wilderness you are going into. What you're doing is exploring. You are undertaking the first experience, not of place, but of yourself in that place. It is an experience of our essential loneliness, for nobody can discover the world for anybody else. It is only after we have discovered it for ourselves that it becomes a common ground and a common bond, and we cease to be alone. So, thank you all for your kind attention. I can't remember if we did questions. Does anyone have anything they want to bring up real quick?
I have a question.
Yeah.
You used the phrase "take refuge" a number of times. It sounds like kind of seeking or receiving comfort. If you're in that state of not knowing mind, is it or should it be comforting?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would encourage you to check it out for yourself. I guess I would say that comfort is another kind of object of awareness. It's another phenomenon, you could say. It's another tumbling on. So, yeah, you could maybe lean into it, and you know, if you take refuge, whatever that means for you. Sometimes people talk about Buddhist practice as taking refuge. You could ask yourself, like, is there comfort here? You know? And I would say probably, like all things, it probably comes and goes. Right? But also, like, you know, things are helpful in a provisional way too. So, you know, maybe it comes and goes on the level of our, you know, empirical experience. But there's also a sense of, you know, it's comforting for me to come here. You know, it does feel like a refuge to come here when I walk in through the door. And my idea of coming here is comforting to me because of that, you know. So of course we're human beings, and we need those things too, to feel like we're part of communities, and you know, those are ideas in a way. What is Minnesota Zen Meditation Center, right? Is it the building? Is it, you know, the guiding teacher? Is it you? You know, it's not any one thing, and yet at the same time, it's helpful to have the concept. So I would say, yeah, maybe just two levels. Of on one level, it's like empirically check it out, like, is it comforting? And then on the other level of our ordinary existence, we could say, you know, is this helpful? Is this skillful? Right? Like, do I derive a sense of comfort from, say, my meditation in general? You know, is it kind of like creating these positive feedback loops? You know, when I'm relating to my meditation. So those are some thoughts. Yeah. What else am I bringing through? Okay.